love of Christ through local education, intervention, and restoration. We are purposefully seeking out victims of trafficking, and we're walking alongside those survivors to empower, connect, and restore. What is sex trafficking? So we're all talking about the same thing. Sex trafficking is the use of force, fraud, or coercion to exploit a person for commercial sexual activities, or any person under the age of 18 involved in a commercial sex act. So let's look at the first part of that first. Force, fraud, and coercion. That could be, you could also say violence, lies, or threats. A lot of people look at what's the difference between prostitution by choice and what's sex trafficking. This is the technicalities of the law here as to which is defined. But I can tell you we've never actually, in all of our years working with survivors, we've never met somebody who really purposely chose to be prostituted. They maybe claim that at the moment, but if you talk to them for any length of time, you find out that there was further exploitation and lack of choice that really didn't make it a choice for them. But technically, by law, it's the use of force, fraud, or coercion to exploit a person for commercial sexual activities. So force, some of those things you were talking about, Floyd, kidnapping, drugging, physical violence, sexual assault. We do see that. We also see a lot of the fraud and coercion. Fraud would be promises to fulfill basic needs or dreams. It'd be promises of love, but false love, false job offers. And coercion might be things like blackmailing, debt bondage, threats to the victim or their family themselves, their family members, like sometimes younger siblings or a child. If a trafficker has a child with the person that they're trafficking, that gives a real power point for them to abuse and manipulate. Then that next part of the top there is that commercial sexual activities, and that means anything in exchange of value for a sexual activity. That could be money, it could be drugs, it could be a meal or a safe place to sleep. So anything in exchange of value for those sexual activities, and sexual activities, anything from prostitution, pornography, sexting, stripping. There's a whole horrible list in our RCWs if you really care to read through and find out what all of those are. It's a kind of a graphic novel in the middle of the RCWs. The big or there in the middle, though, is or any person under the age of 18 involved in a commercial sex act. So if someone is under the age of 18, the law takes out that force, fraud, or coercion, and they put in just the fact that their youth, their age makes them vulnerable. That means if there is a commercial sex act, whoever else is involved beyond that person is responsible for sex trafficking. That makes a lot of sense because we also believe people under the age of 18 are not old enough to vote. We don't believe they're old enough to join the military or even rent a car or smoke or vape. Why would we think if they're not old enough, mature enough to do those things, that they'd be old enough, mature enough to make the decision that it's okay for their body to be abused and raped in exchange for some sort of value? The other thing with that on the person of someone under the age of 18 is it kind of takes out that third party element as well. So even if a 14-year-old or a 17-year-old is soliciting themselves, even if they are coming on to you, even if they are asking for it, the adult is still the responsible party. There doesn't have to be a third party person. There doesn't have to be a trafficker or a pimp involved that's getting the money. As long as there's some sort of exchange of value, a happy meal, a couch to sleep on. In the sense of pornography, it might be the exchange of other videos, one for another, with different people collecting that stuff. All of those come up into that realm of sex trafficking, even though as they get prosecuted, it may be prosecuted under different terminology. So this begs the question of our terminology. You hear the term teen prostitute often, but according to our law and according to the mores of our society, is there really any such thing as a teen prostitute? If it's not legal for someone under the age of 18 to make that decision for themselves, if we don't believe they can make that decision for themselves, can we call them a prostitute? Basically, we're labeling somebody as a product for what's been done to them. So we're labeling the abused person instead of labeling the people who are abusing him or her. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So just as we be careful with our terminology, that and we remember that nearly every victim or survivor that we've worked with since, before 2014, we became a nonprofit in 2014, but we've been working with people since before that. Almost every single survivor we're working with has been first exploited as a child. So even the 40-year-old ladies we're working with, or the 50-year-old, they're still a victim of child sex trafficking. They just never were able to find that help and that hope beforehand. So what does it look like? Who's being trafficked? Trafficking is really just the exploitation of vulnerability, and there's vulnerability. All of us have some sort of vulnerability, right? Even as Steve, as you mentioned, those tough soldiers can have vulnerabilities that trap them and throw them into bad choices and things that happen to them afterwards. And they're pretty tough guys if they've been through the military already. But we all have vulnerability that can be exploited. Some of these things that we see as biggest vulnerabilities are listed here, but honestly, we see people from every socioeconomic background. We see people from wealthy, well-educated families. We see people from impoverished generational abuse. So what does it look like in the Tri-Cities? Is it even happening here? I apologize because I realize this slide has 2019 stats on there. I'll just update you with 2020. Sarah, you were mentioning the quality of our stuff, or Kat was actually, but my gal's been sick, so she hasn't updated that stuff. Is sex trafficking happening here in the Tri-Cities? Well, sadly, yes, it happens everywhere throughout the world, really. I'm not sure about Antarctica. Haven't heard anything there, but other than that, probably just about everywhere. In Tri-Cities, many years ago now, we use these same stories, but many years ago, law enforcement decided to check and see. Ministries does an outreach every year around boat races, or we used to pre-COVID. And so law enforcement decided to go online and see, are there more kids being trafficked during this time? Is that a thing that's happening? They were on Craigslist, which no longer gets to do these services. They were on Craigslist for 20 minutes, and in that 20 minutes found 5 local kids being sold for sex right here in the Tri-Cities. In July of 2017, we had a net nanny sting here in the Tri-Cities, a partnership with several local law enforcement agencies. They arrested 26 men. Most of you probably knew someone in that sting or someone that has been arrested since for sex trafficking charges in the Tri-Cities. Most of the people we're seeing have been pretty upstanding citizens, well known in our community. On that net nanny sting, they arrested those 26 men. They had put up 5 ads on one site for 72 hours for that. They were ads that were copied and pasted from another, so they were normally abnormal sites or ads that would have been posted elsewhere for the people who are shopping for this kind of thing. There were thousands of responses back and forth on those, thousands of communications going back and forth with hundreds of people. These 26 men were the first ones that showed up. These 26 men filled up the ability for our law enforcement and prosecutors to be able to prosecute that many at a time. The repo lot was filled. The capacity had been reached in just 72 hours. 72 hours in one site here in our Tri-Cities. We know, with the gals we work with and the guys we work with, we know there's dozens and dozens of sites. I could list off 24 sites right now, plus a lot of the gals get advertised on things, simple, basic things like not YouTube, but Facebook or Instagram. Are you guys getting bad feedback?
Somewhere.
Hey, Tom, would you mind muting? Tom Head. Thank you. I think his computer has a little extra sound oftentimes, so we'll see if that works.
Excellent. The demand was pretty high, basically, is what we were seeing as the ads were put out there. It's pretty high. We also do an online outreach at Ministries. We work with a group out of Seattle Against Slavery with a project started through Microsoft. We scan ads, or a bot system for us scans ads for people being sold for sex in the Tri-Cities. We send responses back, text messages back, and let them know that we're here to offer hope and help if they would like any services, if they'd like to get out of the life, if they need help. In 2019, that number was stinking high. We had 3,700 local ads that we responded to that the bot system pulled down to where they believed those were the individuals. So there was more ads than that, but think of a robot system, whatever, narrowed it down to those were the individual ones that they found. They revamped the site and gave us, revamped the program and gave us some more sites this year for 2020 and 2021. We're up and running again on 2021, but we now have more options and more abilities to seek out the people that we're looking for. The thing is they're out there, they're hidden in plain sight, right? The crime itself doesn't happen in the middle of the street. We used to see a strip where you at least see the people who are being prostituted were walking that strip, and that's where people would go to purchase. But now what we're seeing is people are being groomed online, people are being sold online, people are setting up dates online. And a lot of even the sexual abuse itself is happening online. So the online outreach has been extremely important. And we've been able to reach several gals through that, even though it's thousands of text messages we're going back and forth with. It takes a while to build that trust relationship. And, but we've seen a handful of gals come out of the life, get resettled into the community or sent out of the community if they came from another location, and finding hope and healing for them, for their kids, and what we would call a healthy, normal lifestyle with a solid job and homes and transportation and all that, building community around them. So what does it look like? Well, we do see a lot of, Floyd, you talked about what we would call the Liam Neeson Taken scenario. And we do see some of that, but in reality, the majority of trafficking is going to happen in some of the scenarios I'm about to talk about here, because when somebody takes someone violent kidnapping like that, it's very obvious. A lot of people see, it attracts the attention of law enforcement. It attracts the attention of citizens. It starts getting spread around on social media, and people tend to get found sooner. And the traffickers tend to get arrested because of that. Some of these other scenarios you'll see are a little bit more subtle and manipulative, but we do see some of that kidnapping. What we like to tell people, though, is it's not stranger danger. It's not typically the big white van, and it's not even typically outside of your house where you're seeing the dangers. It's tricky people. They may be people that you know or trust, but we try to teach kids and adults how to identify what tricky people and what their tricks may be, and then how to identify safe adults that are around them and what that looks like. So a lot of it right now is, well, we'll talk some more on that one, but gangs. Gang trafficking has been happening for years in the Tri-Cities, and that's not unusual. Throughout the country, we see about 25% of girls in gangs are trafficked with either within the gang or to the public. And it's a profitable business for the gangs. Typically, gangs have sold drugs in order to make their money. The problem with selling drugs is every time you need more, you have to go get more supply, right? You run out of supply for the demand. You have to keep going back. When you're going to get more supply, you have to worry if you're going to get caught by law enforcement. When you're traveling with it in your vehicle, you have to worry about getting caught by law enforcement. And as I go to sell it to each of you, I'm going to run out before the demand runs out. I have to start the process all over again. What they found with trafficking their girls is they can resell that girl over and over and over again every night. Our clients will tell us it's usually been about 10 times a night, 7 nights a week, every day of a month. So when you start adding that up, that's a whole lot of serial rape that these girls are going through. But the profit for the gang is great, right? They don't have to keep going back and getting more supply for the demand. The demand never ends. The supply is easy to keep going with the same product being reused over and over again. If that girl does get out, they just grab another one and start her up. If they get pulled over, if that girl gets caught in the act, she's going to be caught with the person who's purchasing. The trafficker's not usually anywhere around. If law enforcement, because for some reason these bad guys like to be really bad drivers, right, Chris? And they get pulled over for stupid things driving, and then that's when they get found out about the other things going on. If they get, right? If they get pulled over and this girl is sitting there in the passenger seat, she's not likely to turn them in, right? Because in gangs, they have a saying, snitches get, somebody's gonna have to unmute. Snitches get stitches. And it's a real thing. We've had some of our girls that have had threats out on them. We've had one that was shot and left to die. The threat is real. There's also that feeling of family and, you just don't tattle, you just don't tell. So she's going to either say it's my boyfriend or maybe it's my auntie, my tia. She's not going to give them away when she gets pulled over. So it's a low risk model, they feel, in the gangs. Less likely to get caught, less likely to get prosecuted because they're just not as visible as it is when they're doing drugs. Gang trafficking is pretty rough, but the one that really rips my heart is familial trafficking. I'm going to have you unmute again on this one. Which family member do you think it is that is most likely to be the first trafficker of a child?
Mother.
Sibling.
Nobody guessed dad, huh? Usually I hear a lot of dad, stepdad, uncle. For our clients and what we see nationwide, mommy has been the first trafficker for almost all of them. Typically ages 3 to 7, and mom starts sending men down the hall to her bedroom. And if you can imagine the emotional trauma that is when mommy is the one who's supposed to love you and protect you, and she is the one who's causing this harm. Even the gals that don't come to us until they're 30, 40, 50 years old are still dealing with that trauma. Not just the rape and torture that they've been through, but that betrayal, that severe betrayal from the mother. Yes, we do. Somebody said siblings, and we do see a lot of peer-to-peer trafficking right now, a lot of peer-to-peer abuse with minors now. It's really expanded a lot in the last few years. And I think that has a lot to do with pornography use and the fact that's become so much more available and so much more addictive and more gruesome. Whole nother half-hour session if we want to talk about that. When we talk about dads, it's quite often the dads that are doing, dad, stepdad, uncle is the one maybe doing pornography within the home, and other family members don't even know that that's happening. We do have dads that are traffickers too, but for some reason it has been mostly the moms have been the first ones. And no, it's not because they were starving and had no place to live. They were going to get out. It's been generational abuse. It's been drugs. It's just been pure depravity. But we do have, you guys are Rotarians, we have resources in our community if somebody really is starving and needs a place to stay. Those aren't a viable reason to sell your child to be abused. Another thing we'll see with the friends you were talking about, Floyd, with the young gals, they might be just charmed by someone. We call it Romeo pimping. This is what we also see with a lot of our endangered runaways that are the missing children you see from National Center Missing and Exploited Children. 90% of the kids at NECMEC, the National Center Missing and Exploited Children, the ones we used to read on the back of cereal boxes and milk cartons, those of us who are old enough, that was our entertainment at breakfast, didn't have iPads. 90% of those kids are missing and endangered runaways. Those kids have been often tricked and coerced, often Romeo'd by someone, where they befriend and charm them, buy them expensive gifts, tell them how wonderful they are, start making sweet promises, and start kind of pulling them away and isolating them from the people who might be there to protect and love on them. By the time, it's a really subtle and manipulative process, but it forms a really super strong bond between the trafficker and the victim. By the time that the victim is being sold for sex, the bond is so strong that there's such a powerful emotional control over them, they just really don't see a way out. They don't know how they got there, but they don't see a way out of it. We're seeing this played out on adults also, but our most vulnerable population for this, and for any of them really, is our kids from the foster care system. Nationwide and in the Tri-Cities, you see a vast percentage. The studies range from 60, but most of them closer to 80% of the kids that have been trafficked, that have been rescued from trafficking, have been part of the foster care system. So they have those broken bonds. They don't have family members who are looking out for them and looking over them. Another one we see with kids that just get tricked. And if you're familiar with date rape drugs, or if you've had a medical procedure or walked somebody through after a medical procedure and they had those twilight drugs, and they act like they're there and they're functioning, but they every few minutes ask you the same question again because the brain has shut off that short-term memory. What we have seen is sweet little girl goes to a friend's party. Everything seems, nobody's drinking or anything. It's not bad. Somebody dropped something in her drink, apparently. The next morning, she wakes up and this phone starts just buzzing at her. And she picks it up to look, and there's nasty pictures on there. But wait a second, that's me and these pictures and videos. What is that? And all of a sudden she's getting threats and these text messages saying, hey, show up and do what we say or else, because with one touch of a button, we could share these with every kid in school. With one touch of a button, we could share these on social media, or we'll share them with your dad, or how about your priest? He's going to see what a little slut you are, what a little whore you are, and they throw that shame on that kid. We see it a lot with kids in like middle school because that brain development just isn't there for the cause and effect to know how to get out of it. But honestly, we see it with adults too, because these people have this power over you and you're trying to break that system. You jump in and you try to make it happen. We've seen trainings like this have made a world of difference because teachers and them start seeing the signs to look for, and they're the ones that intervene, even though the victim is so scared. So our preteens can be very vulnerable because of that cause and effect portion on the brain, but traffickers have really learned that online. And this last year with kids even more online, more on screen, we see studies have shown 69% of teens will say that they have received messages from strangers, but they've never told an adult about them. So they're getting these messages quite often. Pornography pops up on them quite often. All these things are coming at them when they're not really able to know how to process them and what to do with them. So unless we're having those candid conversations that you were talking about, Floyd, I would say 11's pretty old to start. You need to start talking to your little ones about this. When the average age of entry of being prostituted or being commercially sexually exploited as a child is the average age is 11 to 12, a little bit younger for boys. We need to start prepping them and preparing them with wisdom without scaring them, right? Teaching them about tricky people, teaching about what to do when you see good pictures, bad pictures, things like that, and empowering them in how to do that. Most of the grooming we are seeing is happening online. A trafficker can start grooming 7 girls at the same time, sending messages, right? Those, I love you, babe, sending gifts in the mail. Nobody understands me like you. She doesn't know he's sending that to 7 other people at the same time. He can start grooming a whole bunch of girls all at the same time online. So this hasn't really stopped the traffickers a whole lot. Nationwide, we're even seeing kids being sexually abused online without another human ever touching them. So these exploiters are forcing kids, manipulating kids to do one little thing and then the next. So they might talk the girl into lifting up her shirt. And she thinks, okay, fine, it's just you, me talking. Well, the person is taking pictures or videos. And then the next time he asks her to do something a little bit more, and he uses that picture or video to say, hey, you already did this. You don't do this. And I'm going to show these pictures. Who's going to believe that who's going to believe you when they see these pictures that you've been doing? So the manipulation's pretty rough on kiddos. But like I said, it can happen to the adults too. So what do the warning signs look like? When we talk about gangs, you're going to see some specific signs with gangs, right? But you're also going to, a lot of times a girl or a guy might have a street name, street family. They might refer to their boyfriend as daddy. Tattoos in of themselves are not, any one of these signs in and of themselves are not a, hey, they're being trafficked. It's a, let's talk about it and see what's going on. If you have several indicators, there's probably something going on, whether it's trafficking or not. We need to have discussions and start figuring out what's going on. Tattoos in and of themselves are not a bad thing. Many of you probably have them. Certain tattoos though, with people's names, etc., they're a conversation piece and you're going to ask about them. If they're reluctant to talk about their tattoo, and technically somebody under the age of 18, I don't think is even supposed to be able to get a tattoo anymore. So that would be another warning sign. Changes in appearance. They suddenly have high-end clothing, purses, getting manicures and hair done when they couldn't have afforded that before. New gifts are arriving to your home or their home. They've got fancy things they couldn't have before. Multiple working cell phones. A lot of our kids in school will have multiple phones now because they have, this one's their camera and this one has their music on it or whatever, but multiple actually working cell phones. The trafficker wants to keep track of what's going on and they don't want mom and dad to see what's happening. So mom and dad are paying for one phone. Hopefully they're being diligent and checking in on it. The trafficker is going to have another phone for them. Signs of violence or trauma. You're going to see physical abuse. You're going to see things that they're not. If you think of domestic violence and that black eye, I ran into a doorknob, things that just don't make sense or things that aren't being treated. Signs of psychological trauma. So if you've got somebody who's showing obvious signs of trauma and not functioning well, why is that going on? If you have a 13-year-old suddenly starting to use opioids, why are they starting to use drugs? What would draw a 13-year-old into that kind of thing? Fearful of speaking for themselves. We've seen girls that have gone through multiple miscarriages, abortions, and STDs by the time they're 15 years old. Nobody's asking questions. We need to ask questions. What's going on? Why would this happen? Those miscarriages are sometimes that the pimp literally beats the baby out of her, which several of my young friends, that has been part of what happened with them. And then the isolation. So talking about how, once again, on domestic violence, how people will pull someone out and really just make it that they're the only person they can talk to, right? You see that where suddenly the girl's so totally focused on her boyfriend that she can't even have time with her friends. Mom and dad are stupid now. Siblings don't understand. The only person that they can talk to is that one person. So whether it is through those lures of love or through violence, and oftentimes these things get all mixed together. Once again, very much like domestic violence. I say domestic violence on meth is what this looks like. Just more layers where somebody has realized that not only can I use and abuse you, but I can make some money off of you as well. So we do street outreach. We do online outreach. We do education and awareness around town, trying to make sure we can partner with as many agencies as possible so we can find these kids and adults who are hidden in plain sight, people who are being victimized, people who need someone to walk alongside them, and people who need to know that there's some hope, because they literally feel like their worth is nothing. They feel like the product they've been used as. They have come to believe that that is their only worth and value, is to be used by someone. And it's our job to help them realize that your worth is intrinsic in the fact that you are a human being created in the image of God. You are worthy just because you are, and helping them through that. So a lot of our work is done through our 24/7 hotline. The advocates will show up anywhere you call them for, as long as it's somewhat safe. They're gonna, if it's an active crime scene, they're not gonna show up. They're not law enforcement. They're not coming in to rescue someone. We call law enforcement to do that. That's their job. But we will come along with law enforcement as invited. We will be there right as they got someone picked up. We'll be there waiting for them. We will come to them. We call it tenacious grace. We will follow up and follow through, because it's really hard for a survivor to reach out on their own. And it's really hard for them to follow through because of the extreme trauma. The extreme complex trauma done to a victim of trafficking actually mimics exactly in the brain the same type of extreme complex trauma that's done to prisoners of war. If you think about the concepts on both, you can understand why a lot of that is. But it's really hard for someone who's been through all of that to just stand up and function and do all these things on their own. That's why we have our advocates. We also have a whole team of volunteers and mentors, so we can start building healthy community around them. So we have our outreach center in Kennewick. It's an old house that feels, as the girls will say as they walk in, feels like a home should feel like. There we have support groups and counselors. We have studies where they learn about what trauma looks like and how that affects the brain and how they can heal from that, how they can help heal their brain and their body. Coping skills to work with, trauma-informed movement, kickboxing and self-defense, pie baking, jewelry making, art therapy, music therapy. And then we partner out in the community for things like equine therapy. And we even have some folks doing financial counseling and budgeting and stuff like that too. Budgeting for this group of folks is entirely different than most of our budgeting classes out there at our churches or banks, right? Because it's not a matter of, oh, you're going to take this much for your savings and this. You're starting often with huge debts or court fines and things like that, and a very little or no income. So helping people to understand those kinds of things is very specific. But our big job is to help them regain their power, their own personal respect, and understanding that they do have value just for who they are. So the advocates then will do intensive case management, a safe, trusting relationship. They'll help them with health and medical care, get all that stuff lined up. We have counselors that are at our outreach center and counselors throughout the community that will work with them. And we have a whole bunch of different therapeutic services there. We'll work to get people relocated when necessary. And our goal is to have a restoration home for minor girls where they could actually live for a couple of years as they go through these healing processes, because we can relocate our adults into various places throughout the state where we have some restoration homes. We don't have that ability for our minors right now. We had to send one of our kiddos several states away right before the holidays in the midst of COVID. Pretty heart-wrenching she was from a good family, tricked online, but to watch her daddy burst out in tears as he sent his baby girl off, knowing that this was needed for her survival and healing, but knowing that he was not going to be able to see her over the holidays and actually yet still in person. We shouldn't have to send them so far away. Our community, if they're getting hurt here, we should be able to restore them here as well. That healthy community, those people to be there, that's what's important. She says, you know, it's the people that I remember, the people that cared and that tried, that spoke into me and saw something beautiful in me when I couldn't see it for myself. So what can you do? You can, I didn't put in the call 911 slide, but you guys know that one. If you see something immediate, you call 911. If you see something and you're not quite sure, but your gut tells you something's wrong, call our non-emergency numbers and ask to speak to a detective, and make sure you're as specific as you can be about what you think you're seeing. If you think it's a minor, make sure you mention that. If you think there's sex trafficking, make sure you mention that, because otherwise our law enforcement is showing up at the door and they don't know what it is they're looking for. It may look like a mom and dad or a mom and daughter who aren't getting along well. It may look like domestic violence. You need to give what it is you think you're seeing to the detective as much as possible. If you just need help with someone, if you have someone mentioned, you know, kids that you're worried about because they are having unsafe behaviors. If you have someone who's been through this trafficking, but you don't know what to do afterwards, because Floyd, you're right. When they get out, very often because of the trauma, they just slide right back into that same problem, because that the trauma that has happened on the brain, they don't understand they have another option. They need strong community around them that understand the trauma in order to help them with that. You can call our hotline number anytime, day or night. It is 24/7. Trained people will answer. Trained advocates will show up if it's an instance that needs help right that time. And if not, we'll set up an appointment for later if it's not that urgent. But you can also just do what you love to fight what you hate. You're all in Rotary for various reasons. You all love service. You all have skills and talents. Volunteer those to, whether it's Ministries or some other agency that helps in some of these vulnerable positions. You know, there's so many different things that are needed in these different agencies, and you have those skills, so make good use of them. I wanted to make sure I left you guys a few minutes for question time, so hopefully I did that. I'm going to stop there.